Her mother gave her away to a crippled mountain man. But what he really wanted was not a wife at all. This is the story of a young woman whose mother made a desperate bargain, and of a war-broken scout who thought his life was already over. What started as a cold arrangement on paper slowly became a life built by hand, one small choice at a time. Hello, my dear friend. This is your mountain storyteller speaking. Before we begin, feel free to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I send you a warm hug from these old hills, and I hope this tale keeps you good company. The afternoon light slipped through the cracks in the ward cabin, catching dust in the air like slow snow. Eliza Ward sat by the one good window, mending her brother's shirt for what felt like the 100th time. The fabric was so thin, the needle barely had anything to bite into. Her fingers were cracked from cold. Her eyes burned from strain. But she kept working. Every stitch meant another coin from Mrs. Henderson down in the settlement. And every coin meant cornmeal, salt, maybe a scrap of pork if the trader was in a kind mood. From the back corner came a sound that made her whole body tighten. A cough, then another, then a wet rattle that sounded like torn paper. Eliza laid the shirt in her lap and crossed the room in 3 quick steps. Her mother lay on the narrow bed built into the wall. Martha Ward had once been the strongest woman in the valley, swinging an axe, hauling water, laughing loud enough to chase hawks off the fence posts. Now her cheeks were hollow, her skin the color of day-old snow. She pressed a rag to her mouth. When she lifted it, there were tiny flecks of bright red. "Ma," Eliza whispered. Martha tried to smile. "Don't look at me like that, girl. You've got work in your lap. Tommy will freeze if you leave that shirt half done." As if the name had summoned him, the door banged open, and a blast of icy air came in with a lanky boy of 15. Tommy stomped snow off his boots, his dark hair wild from the wind. "They won't give us another thing," he said, not even saying hello. "Mr. Dorsey says we owe more than this land will fetch." He took the last of the potatoes for interest. Eliza felt the now familiar clamp of fear around her chest, but she didn't let it show on her face. "You did right going," she said, putting a hand on his arm. "Go wash at the basin. I'll see what I can stretch for supper." Tommy's eyes were too old for his thin face. "There's nothing left to stretch," he muttered. On the bed, Martha's thin hand moved, catching Eliza's sleeve with surprising strength. "You go see Hannah Crow," she rasped. "Tonight, before dark." Eliza stiffened. "Ma, no. We talked about that. I won't let—" "We're past won't," Martha said, voice barely more than a breath. "We're at must. I don't have the strength to argue, child. You go." There were still a dozen words Eliza wanted to say, but time and hunger had rubbed the sharp edges off her anger months ago. She wrapped her father's old coat around herself, pulled on her boots, and stepped out into air so cold it stung her teeth. The Ward homestead sat in a shallow fold of the mountain. Surrounded by stumps her father had meant to turn into a bigger house someday. The mountains rose around them in layers of blue and white. The sky was hard and pale. Somewhere far above, the wind screamed across the ridges. Down here, it was just a low, steady moan. Hannah Crow's cabin sat where the valley narrowed to a steep ravine. Some folks called her a witch. Some called her a healer. Eliza only knew that when people couldn't pay for a doctor, or when a doctor shrugged and said there was nothing more to be done, they went to Hannah and hoped. The door opened before Eliza could knock. Hannah Crow stood there, thin and straight, gray hair braided down her back, eyes sharp as flint. "My bones said you were coming," she said. "Get in here before the cold bites something you still need." The inside of the cabin smelled of smoke, dried herbs, and something sharp and green. Bundles of plants hung from the rafters. Jars lined the shelves, full of chopped roots, dried leaves, and dark liquids that didn't look like they'd taste pleasant. "How bad is your mama?" Hannah asked. Eliza swallowed. "She's coughing blood now. She can hardly drink broth. The trader cut us off. We don't have enough food for a week. Her voice trembled for the first time in a long time. "I don't know what to do." Hannah nodded slowly, as if this matched something she already knew. "I told her last summer there were herbs that might help," she said. "Things that could ease her lungs, maybe give her another year or two. But they don't grow free, and they don't brew themselves. I can't pay my own debts with good intentions." "We have nothing left to sell," Eliza said. "They took Pa's tools, the mule, even Ma's rocking chair. The bank will take the land come spring." "That's why she wrote me," Hannah replied, "and why I wrote to someone else." Eliza frowned. "Someone else?" Hannah reached to the table and tapped a folded piece of paper. "Elias Boone," she said. "Lives 3 valleys over. Used to be a mountain scout for the army. Took a bullet in the hip and another near the spine at Missionary Ridge. Walks with a cane now, but he still owns more land than most men see in a lifetime." "What does he want with us?" Eliza asked. Hannah's gaze softened the smallest bit. "Your pa saved his life," she said. "Dragged him out of a hail of bullets while bleeding himself. Elias has been carrying that debt around as heavy as his own cane. When your mother wrote, she wasn't just begging a stranger, she was calling in an old promise." Eliza's pulse pounded in her ears. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth," Hannah said plainly. "That Martha Ward was dying, that her children were hungry, that the bank was fixing to swallow your land. I told him you were 22, strong, and too proud for your own good. And I asked what he thought a life was worth to him." "What did he say?" Eliza whispered. "He said he'd send herbs and food enough to see you through this winter," Hannah replied, "and money to keep the banker off a while. Said he'd pay for the boys' schooling when the snow melts. And he said he'd send a wagon to fetch you." "Fetch me?" Eliza repeated, though she already knew the answer. "As his wife in the eyes of the law," Hannah said. "As something different inside his house if that's how the two of you choose it. He wrote that word himself, wife, because bankers and busybodies respect it more than helper or hired girl." Eliza felt the room tilt. "Ma agreed to this? Without asking me?" "Your mother is trying to keep you alive with the little she has left," Hannah said quietly. "She knows you'd never have written that letter yourself. She also knows that if nothing changes, they'll bury her in a drift, and you and that boy will starve before the thaw." "If I say no?" Eliza asked. Hannah's answer was simple. "Then I'll give you what small herbs I can afford to spare, and pray it's enough, and you'll go home to a winter that doesn't care how proud you are." Eliza saw her mother's thin face in her mind, heard Tommy's voice when he'd said, "There's nothing left to stretch." The future she'd been stubbornly clinging to suddenly looked less like independence and more like a slow fade into nothing. "When does the wagon come?" she asked. 3 days, weather holding," Hannah said. "You'll have that long to sow what you want to take and make your peace with what you leave behind." 3 days later, the sound of iron-rimmed wheels echoed up the frozen trail. A wagon drawn by 2 rough-coated horses pulled into the yard. A big man in a wool coat and gray scarf jumped down, steam puffing from the horses' noses. "You Eliza Ward?" he called. "Yes, sir," she answered. "Name's Jonah Pike. I work for Elias Boone." He lifted the wagon's tarp. "Got a chest of herbs and such for your ma, food for a while, And room for you and your bundle if you still mean to come." Inside the cabin, Martha's eyes glittered with fever and unshed tears. Tommy stood with his hands fisted at his sides, defiant and helpless all at once. "You don't have to go," he blurted. "We'll get by somehow. I can find work. I can—" Eliza put both hands on his shoulders. "You're going to school," she said firmly. "You're going to sleep in a bed that doesn't leak and eat food you don't have to pretend fills you. I won't have you breaking your back at 15 just because I was scared to leave home." Tommy's voice cracked. "I don't want you to marry some stranger." "Neither do I," she admitted softly. "But I want Ma breathing, and I want you with a future. This is the only road I see that leads to both." She knelt by her mother's bed. "Are you sure, Ma?" she whispered. "This is really what you want?" Martha cupped her daughter's face, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I want you alive," she said. "I want Tommy with a full belly and a book in his hands. I want one thing in my life that doesn't end with the mountain taking it back. If this man keeps his word, then yes, this is what I want." "I don't even know him," Eliza said. "You didn't know your father the day he was born either," Martha replied. "You grew into loving him. You may never love this man, I can't promise that. But I'd rather you have a distant husband on a solid roof than no roof at all." There wasn't anything left to say after that. Eliza hugged her brother until he wheezed, kissed her mother's forehead, and carried her small bundle to the wagon. She didn't look back until they reached the bend in the road. When she did, she saw a sick woman in a doorway and a boy beside her, both raising hands that trembled in the cold. The trail to Elias Boone's place climbed high into country Eliza had only ever seen from far below. They traveled along a narrow road cut into the side of the mountain, a drop on one side that made her breath catch. The air grew thinner, sharper. Pines leaned heavy with snow. Here and there, animal tracks crossed the road, the only sign of life in a white world. Jonah spoke little, but when she finally asked, "What kind of man is he?" the answer came slow and honest. "He's a man the war chewed up and spit out," Jonah said. "Smart as they come. Used to move through these mountains like a shadow. Now his body makes him pay for every step. He can be hard. He can be quiet enough to make you forget he's in the room. But he doesn't break his word. That's why I work for him." By the time the wagon rolled into a high, hidden valley, the sun was sliding toward the western ridges. Eliza's breath misted in front of her as she stared. The Boone homestead sat at the far end of the clearing, a big log house with a deep porch and a stone chimney, sending steady smoke into the sky. A barn stood nearby, with a corral and a shed. Beyond that, the valley narrowed again into dark trees and rock. It felt like the world had tucked this place away from everything else. Jonah pulled the horses to a stop. "Stay up here a moment," he said. "He'll want to see who he's dealing with." The front door opened. A man stepped out slowly, one hand on the jamb, the other leaning on a cane carved from dark wood. He was tall, though his posture bent a little with pain. His hair was dark, streaked with gray at the temples. A pale scar cut through one eyebrow, turning the eye on that side cloudy and milky. The other was clear and gray, sharp as a winter stream. "Eliza Ward?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she replied, forcing her chin up. "You must be Mr. Boone." He descended the steps with a careful, uneven gait. "Elias," he said. "Mister makes me feel older than the bullets already do." His gaze went over her, the patched coat, the cheap dress, the bundle at her feet, the stubborn line of her mouth. Something flickered behind his eye, but she couldn't name it. "You walk sound?" he asked bluntly. Yes, she said, taken aback. I can walk, work, and carry my own share. Read? He added. I can, she said. My father saw to that before the war took him. Elias nodded once. That'll matter. He glanced at Jonah. Unload the chest for Hannah Crow when you head back down. Girl, bring your bundle. We'll talk inside where my bones don't ache so loud. The main room of the house was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. Maps covered one wall, ink lines marking passes and rivers. A heavy table was scattered with papers, ink bottles, and a stack of envelopes. Shelves along the other wall held jars of herbs, neatly labeled in a tight hand. Elias lowered himself into a chair near the fire with a muted grunt, cane set within reach. He gestured to the other chair. Sit, he said. Eliza perched on the edge, hands flat on her skirt, heart pounding. I won't waste either of our time, he began. Your father pulled me out of a hail of lead at Missionary Ridge. Took a bullet through himself while he was doing it. I've been trying to find ways to square that debt ever since I found out he never made it home. My mother said he died in the war, Eliza said softly. We never knew how. Hard and fast, Elias replied. Talking about you and your ma before the light went out. He said you were stubborn. I see he didn't lie. A tiny, unwilling smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. He was stubborn himself, as I recall. Good, Elias said. Means it runs true. He nodded toward the shelves of herbs. Hannah asked. I agreed. I'll send what I can to ease your mother's breathing. Keep her here longer if the Lord allows. I'll pay off enough of that banker's note to keep your land from being snatched out from under you. When the snow goes, I'll see your brother gets to a school that teaches more than letters scratched in dirt. In exchange for me, Eliza said quietly. For bringing me up here as your wife. For bringing you up here so the law and the neighbors let me do what I'm fixing to do, he corrected. On paper, that word matters. To me, he paused, choosing. To me, it means you live under this roof. You help keep it standing. And we share what needs sharing. I won't pretend there ain't folks who think a man and a woman can only live one way once a preacher's said his piece. I don't much care what they think. I didn't ask Hannah for a bed warmer. What did you ask for? She said, some spark of curiosity edging past her fear. He tapped the stack of papers on the table. Names, he said. Places. Men who died with nobody to tell their sons the truth about how they went. I've been writing to families for years, whenever I can track them down, explaining where their boy fell, who he saved, what last words he said that weren't fit for the good preacher to repeat. He flexed his right hand, the knuckles stiff. My fingers cramp, my eyes blur. The pain in my hip don't like me sitting too long. I can't keep up with the letters and the living who limp their way to this door. I asked for someone who could read, write, cook, stitch up a wound without fainting, and tell me when I'm headed straight off a cliff. Eliza blinked. That's all you want? He held her gaze, gray eye steady. What I want is to pay down a debt to your father and the men who didn't come home, he said. I thought I needed a helper. Hannah and your mother sent me you. Silence settled between them. The fire popped softly. I won't lie to you, Eliza Ward, Elias went on. You walk into this life, you'll see things you can't unsee. Boys younger than you with half their limbs. Men who wake screaming at shadows. Letters from mothers asking why the world took their sons. If you decide that's not a burden you want to carry, I'll still send herbs down that mountain. I'll still taste a second money for the boy. You're giving me a choice? She asked, surprised. As much of one as this hard world ever gives anybody, he said. She thought of her mother's cough, of Tommy's hollow cheeks, of the banker's cold eyes. She thought of that wagon chest with medicines and food, and somewhere under all that, she thought of her father dragging this man out of a storm of bullets, believing it meant something. All right, she said, her voice steady. I'll stay. I'll help you write to the dead men's families and feed the broken ones who make it up here. And I'll let the world call me your wife if that's what keeps the banker honest. For a moment, something eased in his face, a line smoothing that she hadn't realized was there. Fair enough, he said. Then we'll let the preacher say his words tomorrow. After that, we'll get to work. The wedding the next day was short and spare. A circuit preacher rode up, stomping snow off his boots in the yard. They stood in front of the hearth while he opened his Bible. Jonah and the old hand from the barn stood as witnesses. Elias's answers were short and flat. Eliza's "I do" came with a tightness in her throat she couldn't quite swallow down. There was no kiss, just a signed paper, a murmured blessing, and the preacher riding away with some dried meat and a few coins in his saddlebag. That first week, the house felt like two separate worlds sharing the same roof. Elias kept mostly to his circles, from chair to table to porch, cane marking his progress. Eliza kept to the kitchen and the back room that was now hers. At night, she listened to his uneven footsteps going down the hall to the far room, the soft click of his door closing. They spoke only when they had to. More coffee? Yes, thank you. Pass the salt? Pantry's short on beans. I'll have Jonah see what he can trade for. But the work they did together didn't leave much room for silence in their hearts. He showed her how he arranged the letters. Here, the men who'd died in Tennessee. There, the ones from Georgia. He dictated names, dates, small stories about small acts of bravery. She copied them into clear script, hands steady even when his voice shook. In the kitchen, she learned where he kept everything: flour, beans, dried meat, precious jars of sugar. She baked biscuits, simmered stews, sent plates out to the barn and the loft. Jonah and the old man ate quietly, but with the grateful speed of men who worked in the cold. One night, a hard snow came down from the high peaks, and with it, the first of the broken men Elias had warned her about. The dogs started barking just after dark. Elias's head snapped up like he'd been yanked by a rope. He grabbed his cane and went to the door. Eliza followed, heart thudding. Out in the swirl of snow, a figure staggered into the yard, coat hanging open, hat gone. He would have fallen if Elias hadn't braced under his arm. Easy, son, Elias grunted. You're on your feet. Let's keep you there a few more steps. Eliza hurried to the other side, slipping under the stranger's weight. Together, they half-dragged him inside and laid him on the long table near the fire. His face was hollow, beard patchy. When his torn trouser leg shifted, Eliza saw why he moved the way he did. His left leg ended above the knee in a raw, bandaged stump. The wood of his peg leg clattered to the floor. Name? Elias asked. Corporal James Riley, he gasped. Company D, or what's left of it. Easy, Riley, Elias said. Company D ain't here. Just my house and my people. That'll do for tonight. He turned to Eliza. Boil water, big kettle, willow bark and comfrey on the shelf, clean cloths from the chest. You know how to steep a strong brew? Yes, she said, hands already moving. They worked until their arms shook. Elias peeled away the filthy bandages, washed the wound with water that made Riley cry out, then spoke to him in a low, steady voice until the man's fists unclenched. Eliza brewed bitter tea that made Riley gag, but then breathe a little easier. She wiped sweat from his forehead and eased a scrap of blanket under his head. By the time Riley finally slept in ragged gasps, the fire had burned low. Eliza's back ached. Elias was leaning heavily on his cane, his injured leg trembling. "You should sit," she said. "So should you," he replied. "And yet we're both still standing." They sank into chairs on opposite sides of the hearth. For a while, they just listened to the wind. "You really meant it," Eliza said quietly at last. "About men like him finding their way up here." "I did," Elias said. "He's not the first, won't be the last. I can't send them away hungry. I won't." "Why?" she asked. "The war is over." He stared into the coals until his face looked carved from the same firelit stone. "For some men, it never ended," he said. "The rest of the world moved on. They didn't. I know what that feels like. This," he nodded toward the table where Riley lay, "is the only kind of battlefield I can still do anything about." She thought of the way his hands had moved, sure and careful, in spite of his own pain. "And me?" she asked. "Where do I fit into that, besides stirring pots and boiling water?" His gaze shifted to her. "I told you what I wanted," he said. "Hands that don't shake, eyes that don't flinch, a mind that can hold the weight of what we're doing without collapsing under it. You chose to stay, Eliza. That tells me more about you than any Sunday dress would." "I stayed because my mother's life is hanging on your herbs," she said. "Because my brother is sitting in a classroom he'd never see otherwise. Don't give me too much credit." "I stayed alive because your father dragged me off that ridge," Elias answered. "We all serve our debts in the ways we can." Winter taught them each other's rhythms. Riley stayed, at least for a time. He slept in the loft with the others, moved around on a crutch Jonah whittled for him, earned his keep mending harness and splitting kindling. Other men came and went. A boy with a mangled hand, a quiet fellow who flinched at loud noises, a man whose lungs rattled worse than Martha's. Eliza found herself moving among them naturally. She poured coffee, listened to stories, ignored jokes that tried too hard to sound brave. She changed bandages and shook men awake from bad dreams. She began to understand what Elias meant when he said the war didn't end for everyone. Every week, Jonah took down a packet of herbs and envelopes addressed in Eliza's careful hand. Every week, he brought back a small bundle from Hannah, a jar of something sharp-smelling for Elias's hip, a folded note, sometimes a scrap of paper in Tommy's uneven scrawl. "Dear Eliza, the teacher says I'm good with numbers. I never knew I liked them. I sleep in a bed with a real mattress. I had meat twice this week. I don't forget you. I won't waste this chance." Tom Hannah's notes about Martha grew slowly more hopeful. Less blood in the cough this week, more color in her cheeks. "She's cussing me again. That's a good sign." One evening when Eliza read a letter aloud, her voice shook for the first time. "They're better," she said. "She's breathing easier. Tom's happy." Elias's rough voice softened. "Good," he said. "Then this trade your mother made is paying out on both sides." Something in her chest unclenched that night. She still missed the cabin, the crooked table, even the wind under the door. But the ache was no longer sharp. It was a thread now, woven into new routines. Bread to bake, letters to write, men to feed, herbs to brew for a man who moved like every step cost him something. Spring came late to the high valley, but it came. Snow melted away from the trunks of the firs. The creek roared with meltwater. The meadow in front of the house turned to a soft, wet green. One clear morning, Jonah rode out early. When he came back in the afternoon, he wasn't alone. A wagon pulled into the yard, and Eliza's breath lodged in her throat. Tommy jumped down first, taller now, with new boots and a grin she hadn't seen in years. Hannah climbed more slowly, bones stiff from the ride. And behind them, with care, Martha Ward stepped down, thinner than before, but upright. "Ma," Eliza whispered, and then there were no more words, just arms and tears and laughter all mixed together. "You look like you've been eating regular," Martha said, wiping her eyes. "And yelling at somebody regular too. Your eyes get that sharp when you're scolding." "Maybe I am," Eliza said, laughing through her tears. "You'll have to ask Mr. Boone." Elias had stayed back by the porch, giving them space. Now he came forward slowly, hat in hand. "Mrs. Ward," he said simply. Martha studied him from boots to eyes, taking in the cane, the scar, the way he held himself. "So you're the crippled mountain man I handed my daughter to," she said. "Most men would have sent money and stayed clear of the trouble, you know." "Mama," Eliza hissed, scandalized. Elias didn't bristle. "I'm the man who owed your husband his life," he replied. "This is the best way I know to pay it back. You can judge for yourself if I'm doing a decent job." Martha's gaze slid to her daughter, to Tom in his better clothes, to the house, the barn, the men nodding respectfully as they passed. She nodded once. "Looks to me like you're doing fair," she said. "Don't make me a liar." That week was loud and full. Tom explored every corner of the valley. Martha sat by the fire and watched her daughter move through the room, a quiet pride in her tired eyes. Hannah and Elias argued about herbs and dosages at the table like two old crows on a branch. One evening, when the others had gone to bed, Eliza and Elias found themselves alone on the porch. The air was soft. Frogs were singing down by the creek. The mountains were just shadows against a sky full of stars. "I judged you hard that first day," Eliza said quietly. "I thought you were buying a wife the way other men buy a good saddle." "You weren't wrong to be wary," Elias said. "Most bargains men make up here are bad ones for women." "And this one?" she asked. He took a slow breath. "This one started as a debt," he said. "Then it turned into work. Somewhere along the way, it turned into something else I don't quite have words for." She looked at him, at the stiffness in his shoulders, at the lines around his mouth that weren't all from pain. "When my mother wrote that letter," she said, "I thought she'd given me away. Sold me, really, for herbs and school books. I hated her for it. I hated you, without even knowing you. But now..." She gestured at the valley, the house, the faint laughter drifting from inside. "Now it feels like she gave me something I didn't know I could have," she finished. "A life that's hard, yes, but full." Elias's hand tightened on his cane. "I told you I didn't want a wife," he said. "And I didn't. Not any wife. I thought that part of my life went into the ground with the men I left on those hills. What I didn't expect was wanting you. Not out of duty. Not out of debt. Just wanting you here when I wake up and there when I go to sleep." The words came out rough, like they'd had to fight their way past a wall. "You don't owe me that feeling," he added quickly. "If all you ever want from me is herbs for your mother, schooling for your brother, and a roof over your head while you help me feed broken soldiers, I'll take it." and count myself ahead of the game. Eliza felt her heart beat hard against her ribs. When I came up this mountain, I promised myself I'd never give you more than I had to, she said slowly. I thought it would be easier to live with if I kept my heart out of it. And? He asked. She gave a small, helpless laugh. And somewhere between the first letter you dictated and the first time you made coffee for me without saying a word, I stopped keeping that promise. I don't know what kind of wife I know how to be, but I know this. If I had the power to choose my path again, knowing everything I know now, I'd still get in that wagon. His hand found hers on the porch rail, work rough and warm. For a man who thought he was finished with hope, he said quietly, that's more than he ever expected to hear. Years passed in that high valley. The war moved further into stories for the young, but Elias Boone's house stayed what it had become, a place where broken men could find a bed, a meal, and someone who understood. Eliza's handwriting filled drawer after drawer with letters, some of condolence, some of gratitude, all written in clear lines that never forgot the human at the other end. Children's voices joined the sound of axes and hammers. A little boy with his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn jaw learned to walk by holding onto Elias's cane. A girl with her grandmother's laugh climbed fence rails and scolded grown men for not eating enough stew. Tom Ward grew into a man who knew the price of a second chance. He studied hard, became the kind of man who read contracts twice before anyone signed them, making sure no one else's home would be taken for a handful of coins and a hard winter. Martha lived long enough to rock both grandchildren, coughing less and smiling more. When she finally went, it was in a bed with quilts over her and hands holding hers, not alone in a cold cabin listening to her own lungs rattle. People in the settlements below told the story in their own way. They said, her mother gave her away to a crippled mountain man. Can you imagine? They shook their heads, then added, but he took in every broken soldier that came his way, and that girl stood right beside him. They made something out of each other's ruins. If you'd asked Eliza about it in her later years, sitting on that porch with hair gone silver and hands still ink-stained, she would have smiled. My mother didn't give me away, she would have said. She gave me a future. She gave me work that mattered. She gave me a man I learned to love the slow, hard way, which is the only way love really lasts. And if you'd asked Elias, sometime when the pain in his hip was lower and the fire was high, he would have tapped his cane and said, I thought I was bringing up a girl to square a debt. Turns out, I brought up the rest of my life. My dear friend, if you've stayed with me to the end of this mountain tale, maybe some part of it brushed against your own story. Maybe you too have walked into something that started as a burden and slowly turned into a blessing. If this story touched you, you're welcome to subscribe, tap like, and in the comments, write one word, hope, just to let me know you're out there listening under your own patch of sky, still believing that even the hardest bargains life hands us can be turned into something good. Until next time, I wish you warm coffee, a steady fire, and a heart that keeps choosing to begin again.